For as far back as we have records, the Letnev of Arc Prime have been driven to conquer and militarily subjugate their neighbors. It is almost instinctual, a direct result of having evolved on such a stark and barren world. Arc Prime is the most desolate planet hosting a major civilization in the entire galaxy. Its system doesn't even have a central star, meaning life on Arc Prime must use the planet's geothermal energy to sustain itself. Such a place is all but inhospitable to life, which in turn forced the native Letnev to quickly turn to conquest if they were to survive. Before they could do that, however, the Letnev would have to unite, or else internecine wars would see the end of their civilization. Now the Letnev are by nature an ambitious people, merciless in their pursuit of power and acclaim. Thus, early on, before the establishment of the Barony, Arc Prime was a battleground of different Letnev families warring for supremacy. While this ambition would serve the Barony well throughout its history, that same ambition was also a great impediment to its foundation. Unfortunately, no record exists of the Letnev unification into the Barony of Letnev, or who first called themselves the Baron of the Letnev. It is likely some great warlord amassed enough power and influence among the starving denizens of Arc Prime that he was able to unify the planet. Unfortunately, the details are lost to time. What is known is that once unified, the Barony immediately set about conquering every world within its reach. At some point, this expansion would result in a great territorial war between the fledgling Federation of Sol and the newborn Barony, leading to long-lasting animosity between the two powers. But this struggle between the two young civilizations would be cut short. The Imperial Armada, heralding the arrival of a rising Lazax, was enough to convince the Baron that the Letnev would have to submit to Imperial hegemony. But this submission would not last long. The Letnev chafed mightily under the yoke of Lazax rule, and even before the Quan incident, tried 3 times to throw off Imperial fetters. The last and greatest of these revolts began some 800 years before the outbreak of the Twilight Wars in the insignificant Gandar system of Barony space. Dissatisfaction with Lazax trade practices among the Letnev locals soon saw Gandar declare independence and jihad against the Imperial race. This was met with bemusement by the Emperor, who saw Gandar as nothing more than a backwater. However, the rebellion soon spread beyond the isolated star system, winning support among many malcontents throughout the galaxy. Soon, Letnev armadas, Hylar strike fleets, and Hakan logistic flotillas all were engaged in military action against Imperial installations. Only the Barony, however, was bold enough, or perhaps foolish enough, to officially join the rebels. At its height, the Gandar Rebellion liberated 24 major star systems and over 2,000 minor systems from the Lazax. But such success was short-lived. This was not, after all, the Age of Dusk, and the Emperor was not yet as powerless as he would one day become. Mobilization had begun early, and soon massive Lazax fleets were cutting through rebel forces without mercy. Imperial shock troops, trained on the unforgiving planet of Hope's End, were first introduced during this war, and they saw great success, retaking the entire Gandar system in one day and occupying Arc Prime till the end of the war. The Gandar Rebellion, in the end, was crushed without mercy. The revolt's leadership was executed in its entirety, the executions overseen by Imperial shock troops. Rebel sympathizers were processed at the hulking military complexes on Industrix, before being shipped off to penal colonies along the Passage of Tears, including newly founded Mol Primus. It would be 800 years before any of the great races dare challenge the Lazax again. But when that time did come, it would again be the Letnev who would take a leading role in instigating it. The Quan conflict was in many ways a direct result of the Gandar rebellion centuries earlier. In order to prevent further revolts, the Lazax began to maintain strict control of the Letnev food supplies and off-planet trade. Despite its incredible metallurgical wealth, Arc Prime suffered from chronic foodstuff and water shortages. Thus, these Imperial embargoes were an affront to the Letnev nobility, who saw such actions by the Lazax as an insult to their honor and an impediment to their ambitions. In protest, the Barony blockaded the Quan wormhole, disrupting galactic trade and angering the Lazax, Federation of Sol, and all who relied on the Beta wormhole for commerce. A bitter stalemate ensued, with trade cut off to both Barony space as well as starving Federation colonies. Something would have to give. The Federation of Sol, facing widespread famine on many of their colony worlds, were desperate, and desperation often leads to bloodshed. Word came down from Federation High Command to open fire on the blockade, and with that, the opening salvos of the Twilight Wars rang out. The much-reduced Lazax, surprised by the open war now waging within their galaxy, tried to rein in the Letnev and humans diplomatically, but to no avail. Thus, the aged behemoth once more began to mobilize for war. The Letnev were no fools. Having learned from their previous failed rebellions, they knew none of the great races was a match for the Lazax. Many Barony nobles began to discuss suing for peace to avoid the wrath of the emperors. But the Baron, Vavlas Samrak the 17th, knew something that they didn't. Word had come from Simfen agents that Sol intended to launch a full-fledged assault on Mechatol Rex. With only months to spare, the Baron wasted no time. As the humans would strike their dagger into the heart of the Empire, Letnev raiders would be ready to assault vital neighboring systems. Here, they would reap food stores and slaves, bolstering the Letnev engine of war that the Baron meant to unleash on the galaxy. But as with all the other great races, the Baron had foolishly underestimated the scope of what he had planned. As Mechatol fell, and the Great Purge made the Lazax but a distant memory, total war engulfed the galaxy. No major civilization was spared. Each was, in turn, reduced and broken, and the Letnev were no different. Overly reliant on colonies and trade, the Barony quickly realized its folly as the Twilight Wars stripped both away. The Letnev war machine was unparalleled, but its soldiers were starving. Before long, the Letnev was forced to retreat back into the core of Barony space, unable to support campaigns further afield. Despite all their ambition, the Letnev soon found themselves isolated and diminished as the long night settled over the galaxy. It would be many long millennia before Letnev ambition would reach such heights again. As the galaxy rested in darkness following the Twilight Wars, life on Arc Prime became characterized by subterfuge and political maneuvers. Letnev society had always been one of backstabbing, assassination, and manipulation. But the long night turned this up to 11. By the time of the Custodial Wars, the barony had been completely transformed. Its traditional leadership deposed or dead and replaced by young and ambitious families. And one such family was the Verkan dynasty, which had, only 3 generations before, seized the barony from its previous rulers. Now, as the galaxy was emerging from darkness, the Baron of the Letnev, Daz Emisiel Verkan III, felt his ambitions stir once more. Setting his eyes on distant suns, the Baron foresaw a future where he would sit on the shattered throne of the emperors, where he would rule the stars, as was the Letnev birthright. Oh, and before you go, don't forget, leave a comment on this video, or any video posted this month, and you'll be entered to win a copy of Twilight Imperium. All the details can be found in the video description. May the best man win. Cheers!